What's up? I'm AJ and welcome back to Gen Z Garage. Welcome back. Today's video is going to be our fourth video in my engine removal series. In today's video, I'm going to be preparing my car for me to remove the engine. But before we begin, I'd like to tell you what this is from last week's trivia.
The answer to the trivia question is, this is a shunt. A shunt is an analog device that allows for voltage to be measured when the current on a DC line is high enough where it can damage devices directly connected to the line. It's a resistive element that is made of two conductive metals with layers of manganese in between. Manganese is an alloy that typically consists of copper, nickel, and manganese. The shunt is placed directly in line of the current and provides low enough resistance to neither impede or disrupt the flow of the current, but just enough so that the voltage can be measured. This particular shunt comes from a 1970 General Motors vehicle and is used to feed the voltage gauge, as well as the voltage regulator, and not damage it. Unfortunately, no one got the trivia this time, but the closest answer, once again, comes from TurboSlug, where he suggested it could be a fuse. We'll give it to you, TurboSlug, because these in fact can burn out and effectively are replaceable like a fuse. If you've seen some of my prior videos, you know that I have been going through the process to restore my Fiero. At this point in the process, I'm working to rebuild the engine and clean up the engine bay. In the previous videos, I removed the intake manifold and the exhaust manifold. While we aren't removing the engine in this video, the point will be to prepare the engine bay for the next video when we do. We'll need to disconnect everything that is attached to the engine, transmission, and subframe so there won't be anything preventing us from separating them. We'll start with the fuel lines because they are the most obvious. We'll remove the hardline extension first and toss it in the bucket for safekeeping. Next, we'll remove the fuel filter and hardline connector. We'll throw those in the bucket too, just in case we need them. Finally, even though we plan to replace these hard lines with new stainless ones, we'll put a bag over the ends and zip tie them out of the way. Next, we'll disconnect the shift cables from the manual transmission. We'll start by popping free the shift cable ends from the ball pivots on the transmission assembly. We use a trim removal fork tool to make this job easy. An automatic transmission will have one, but my manual transmission has two. Next, we'll remove the shift cable retaining bracket. For the 5-speed Isuzu, there is a single 10mm nut that holds the bracket halves together. Work very slowly when you remove this. This particular nut has a tendency to break, which essentially ruins the primary bracket half. As you loosen the bolt, you may need to carefully pry the bracket free with a thin-bladed flathead screwdriver. The two halves are made of aluminum and tend to oxidize. This may cause them to seize together. Finish removing the screw and store both the bracket and the bolt in a delicate storage place for safekeeping. Next, we remove the shifter cables from the lower bracket half that's attached to the transmission. As I mentioned, this bracket is aluminum and tends to oxidize. This may cause the cables to stick to the mount. You may need to use a rubber mallet or some leverage to break them free. These are expensive, so be careful. We'll take both cables and carefully tie them off to the front of the engine compartment and out of the way. Now, we'll remove the cooling hose that connects the filler neck and thermostat housing to the coolant pipe that runs along the driver's side threshold. It's held in place by a single hose clamp by the filler neck, and a second hose clamp on the pipe which we've already removed. When the clamp is loose enough, we can just pull the hose off the neck. The neck is rusty and the ridge is completely gone. We'll replace this, but leave it attached to the engine for now. We'll go ahead and pull the hose free from the pipe to get it out of the way. I'll keep the hose clamp, just in case. We can now start tackling the engine compartment wiring harness. We begin first by disconnecting the connectors, starting with the coolant temperature sensor on the thermostat housing, followed by the tach filter, then the vehicle speed sensor on the transmission, then the transmission reverse indicator switch, and finally, the large oil pressure sensor connector. With these disconnected, I'll free up the cable a little so I can get to some of the other connectors. The cable is held in place by a grounding wire attached to the side of the engine. Once this is removed, we can move the main harness more freely. Next, we'll disconnect the ignition control module connectors, starting with the ECM connector, followed by the ignition coil harness connector. The other side of this connector was already removed when we disconnected the ignition coil in an earlier video. We'll put that off to the side for safekeeping. We now move to the other side of the engine, starting with the alternator. We remove the 10mm nut off the positive lead and put that to the side. Then we disconnect the plug harness. Next, we'll tackle the power block connector. This is attached by a large bolt in the center which holds the two separate connectors together. The front-facing block can then be removed by releasing two clips, and it slides out the side with the harness intact. I then unscrew and detach the positive cables from the distribution block. With these removed, I can now separate the main engine harness completely from the front and side, and put it off to the side. Last but not least, we need to remove the AC compressor harness which runs along under the exhaust manifold behind the shield. One connector snaps on, while the other is attached with a small nut. I now bundle the entire harness together, wrap it in a bag, and tuck it out of the way. With the wiring harness out of the way, I start tackling some of the bigger items around the engine compartment. I'll be removing these anyway when I paint the inside of the engine compartment, so I may as well remove them now to make it easier to remove the engine. Here, I'm removing one of the heat shields that deflects heat from the muffler away from the distributor and intake manifold. It's attached with three 10mm bolts and it just pops off. And then the alternator, which is extremely difficult to get because of this swing bar that was welded into the frame. I can't wait to cut that thing out. After a lot of effort, the top bracket is removed.
Yes, I did it.
All right.
Oh my god.
And then the AC compressor lines, which I tie up with a zip tie to get it out of the way. And then the heater hose, followed by the passenger side coolant hose. I then have to cut both hoses with a razor blade to remove them. Next, I move to the other side and remove the shifter bracket to prevent it from getting damaged or bent during cradle removal. Then I remove the cruise control cable using a pair of pliers to compress the locking tabs. Fun fact, these pliers are over 100 years old and belong to my great-grandfather. And finally, the clutch slave cylinder.
What is that? So this was exhausting, but definitely very fun. Definitely dirty too. I have lots of dirt smileys on my shin that I drew. So in this video, we removed everything that could obstruct the engine for when we remove it in the next video. If you want to see that video, make sure to like and subscribe and turn on notifications so you can get the notification for when I post that. The trivia question for today is, what do you think this is? Tell me in the comments below and I'll tell you the answer in the next video.
You're still here? It's over. Go home. Go.